let's go back to the beginning here. Why did you decide to put your hand up in the first place for what is looking like it's going to be a pretty, crowded upper house ticket?
Look, I think there are a number of factors. One was obviously the so-called Teal wave from the federal election, which suggests not only that people are becoming conscious of climate change and the urgency of that as an issue, but also that the old allegiance to the major parties is starting to crack open. So a slightly disruptive model of politics might be possible. Also, because at this, it makes it a good moment in history that we have an upper house that is more or less evenly divided between the progressives and the more conservative mob, sort of 2022. So if we could hold like one or possibly two seats, then you could actually hold the balance of power. And that becomes really important, obviously, in terms of not just the review function of the upper house, but also the potential of introducing legislation. And thirdly, I suppose I stood as an independent in the Strathfield by-election last year, and we achieved 10% of the vote, although it was all about a 3-week election campaign. So we thought that was pretty good. We beat the Greens as the third party. And so we thought, if we could replicate that or even half of the amount, we would get somebody into the upper house. And we figured because that was based largely on my existing profile as a columnist for the Herald for a long time, and other things, that there was a potential to actually achieve some change there.
And of course, in the upper house, to have a realistic chance of winning, you've got to be in a party. You've registered the party by, essentially taking over what was Keep Sydney Open, the Open Party.
That's right.
How'd that all come about? How'd you actually manage to do that?
Well, it was kind of, luck, I guess, partly, serendipity, perhaps. So when I first considered this, which was something, I guess, like maybe April or something last year, just in a vague way, and I rang Justin Field. I thought, are there any independents in the upper house? The only one at the moment seems to be Justin Field, who clearly was a Green and is now an independent. So I called him. And we had a chat, and I said, are you going to run again? And he said, no, it's much too hard as an independent. And I said, why? And he said, because in order to get your name above the line, you need to have a party. And furthermore, the party has to have been registered for a full year before the election. So it's actually already too late to form such a party, even if you could, which is a huge ask. So I thought, oh, damn. And then I thought, I wonder if there's anyone we know who's got a semi-moribund party that they'd like to give to a good home, so to speak. And I looked at the register, and there was not Keep Sydney Open, the Open Party, which had been, as you say, Keep Sydney Open. And I knew Tyson Coe a little bit, and some of the other guys a bit, because I think I'd done a talk for them or something back in the day. And I also knew that they'd achieved their aim. So I thought, well, maybe they want to do something. And I rang them, and they said, yes, as it happens, we would like to, because we figured our policies and our attitudes and principles aligned pretty strongly, although clearly theirs was much more focused on that particular issue than we wanted to be. But nevertheless, we figured we were pretty much in agreement about things, and that we would make good allies. And so we decided to embark on that transition from the Open Party to what is now Elizabeth Farrelly Independence. And we chose that name because in order to get my name and the name recognition above the line, we were speaking to a few advisors, and they said, well, you have to use your own name because that's where the recognition is. So it's a bit of a long story, and it does sound like a contradiction in terms to have an independent party, but that is because of the necessity generated by the legislation and the requirement about the ballot paper. And I think it's actually part of possibly a deliberate attempt to make it very difficult for independents to be elected. So we decided to do that in order to make it possible.
Yeah, I guess the thing about the name is because we there's been plenty of, if we look federally, plenty of senators who have gone independent, formed their own party. You look at the Jackie Lambie Network, Rex Patrick
Hmm.
team. The list could go, on and on here. I could give about a dozen examples. But when you use the word independent, I mean, is it really fair to use that? Because you are a party, you have to be registered. There's inevitably going to be other candidates, so obviously you're going to be, top of the ticket, best chance of winning.
Hmm.
Is it fair to use that specific word independent over, say, team, network, anything like that?
Yes, I do think so. Partly because um, I've always been, I mean, I was an independent councillor in the city of Sydney back in the 90s, and I was independent in my campaign in Strathfield. And um, I think anybody who knows me and knows my work would understand that my allegiances have always been independent. Uh, and and I've always made a point of sort of, as it were, speaking truth to power. So I think, and we are a very community-based group. Uh, we don't have a party structure particularly. There's no such thing as a party machine as there is in the Labor or Liberal parties. There's no kind of enforcement. There won't be any sort of whip system. Not that we expect to have dozens of MPs, I guess, but um, yeah, we're very. I think it is. I think it is fair to call us independents because we're not and can never be beholden to any major donors or to a whip system or to factions. It's very loose, and I suppose that situation can change, and it's possible that in the future that might shift if the party became more established. But at the moment it is a very loose coalition of individuals who have decided that the kind of the principles of climate action, government honesty, and sustainable communities are what we agree on, and we will support those in principle.
It was reported, though, you did only a couple of years ago try to get into the Labor Party in some regards. How independent actually are you?
I figured that would come up. Look, yes. So, well, the way that happened was when I was moving, I'd always lived in the inner city, and when I moved to Strathfield in what was it, 2021, I was recognised in the street by some local members of the Labor Party who said, we love your book and we love what you stand for, and can you join the Labor Party and stand for us in Reid, because the federal election was coming up. And at that stage, the Morrison government was at its most destructive height. And I thought, well, it's against my principles to join parties, but maybe, you should do this in order to have a chance of helping to knock off what I thought was a very bad government. And so I did that, and I was a member for all of about, I think it's almost exactly 2 months. And I wasn't pre-selected for that seat or at state level, and that was fine. That was entirely their prerogative. And so I left. So I think I joined in July and left in September. And so it was very short-lived, and possibly that was a mistake. But in any case, that was the extent of my party memberships. I mean, you could see that as a big black mark, but I think it was done in good faith and for the right reasons, actually.
It obviously was a short time, as you explained there, but
Mm.
inevitably there are going to be opponents of you who are going to use that against you. So where do you, in terms of policies you've used, the things you are campaigning on in this election, actually differ from a party like Labor?
Oh, well, in very big ways, actually. Labor in what it says is one thing, and Labor in what it does is another. And that's one of my major disagreements. For example, I don't, even in my experience, as a very short-lived member of the Labor Party, the reason I wasn't pre-selected isn't because there wasn't support at ground level, but because they've airlifted in candidates from outside the area. So that sort of arrogance is something that I fundamentally disagree with. I also, the Labor Party is responsible for Barangaroo in Sydney, which was a huge betrayal of public trust by more or less giving 20, I think it's 26 hectares of public land to one developer to develop pretty much as they saw fit, in ways that I just think is an absolute disgrace. And so they have been party to the privatization and of public land and public assets, with which I fundamentally disagree. And also, for example, on the cashless gaming card, where they have, the old addiction to that as an income source means that they don't actually come out with a clear position, whereas we would very much support that sort of regulatory control because it is in the public interest to do that. So I think when it comes to on the ground action, because we're unfettered by major donors or by, big money or any of the kind of machine of party structure, we are much more capable of acting truly according to principle.
I know you mentioned the success of Teal Independence when I asked you, why you're running, and I saw that a lot here in Victoria. My local MP is Monique Ryan, Teal Independent. Why choose the color teal though? Was it just because of that success?
Look, yes, I think so. I think it's such an optimistic sign and a heartening movement because it suggests that ordinary people who are not party hacks and haven't worked their way up through the party machine can participate strongly and usefully in the democracy, which, as far as I'm concerned, is what democracy should be about. So aligning ourselves with that. I'm not sure that you can even call it a movement because they are all independents and they do have different views about a lot of things, but they're as one in particular on climate action and gender equity and integrity. And I think those things are principles that I strongly support and always have strongly supported. So I think I have no difficulty saying we're absolutely in that camp on those issues, and on everything else we are free to behave as individuals and genuine independents. But with those things, we're completely on the same page.
And just going back to what we mentioned with the party, obviously, there, as you said, there is no major party structure. You described it a bit of a loose coalition there. But there is going to have to be other people on this ticket, and if you do really well, you could get yourself and someone else in. How are you going to go about actually deciding who else runs for your party?
Well, look, at the moment we've got we have to field a full ticket of 15 people in order to achieve the whole purpose of this, which is getting our name above the line. So that's required. I think ideally we probably wouldn't do that because it's a little bit symbolic, most of that. Nevertheless, we have a short list. We have a list of at the moment, we've got a list of about, I think, 12 people who've committed. We haven't agreed yet on the order of those people, although there's a sort of a loose, again, it's kind of working it out. And I think we will need to make some definite decisions about that in the next probably week or two. We have to nominate, after all, next month. So that is imminent, that decision making. And I think most of the decisions that we've made so far about policy stuff, we kind of just work together as a party. And we're very closely aligned in terms of our ideas, but we do have different views on some detail, and we're quite good at arguing things out. So I think the same kind of process will probably apply. And a lot of people actually say, I'd love to be a candidate, but actually I haven't got time to be an MP at this point. So can I go below number 3? So, I think it won't be all that difficult. But we do have to make that decision pretty soon. And there is, as I say, a short list of people who are kind of close to the top of the ticket. And I don't think it's going to be all that difficult to decide.
I know you said there that, sometimes you're, members having disagreements. Couldn't that, for a minor party, a new one that is aiming to, get first ever representation, couldn't that be a bit of a, recipe for chaos, recipe for disaster if you're all, I get small disagreements, but as a new party, surely want to be as unified as possible, especially if you might be on the same ticket.
Look, no, I think it's healthy. I think that's what democracy should be about. I mean, we haven't yet come across anything fundamental or anything that we can't resolve. So even in terms of detail. Like, for example, we launched our water policy last week, which was quite a detailed document, and we just kind of ironed out small differences about, you know, how much water should be retained on site or required to be retained on, you know, I mean, really quite small things. And I think that the answer to it really is that in the end, we will be responsive to the community. And I think if we find issues that we can't resolve, we'll probably just test the opinion of the public and the community and our constituents, and try and work it out that way. But I don't anticipate that there's anything really major, because we strongly support very similar principles, and we're so far pretty good at just arguing it out until we resolve it, and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, let's just go with that. And yeah, so far it's worked really well. But I think that as independents in Parliament, say there was more than one of us, I think it probably also wouldn't be the end of the world if we had, you know, slightly different takes on things. Because I do think that's how democracy needs to work. As long as the opinions and the principles are genuinely held and aren't arrived at through horse trading and doing favors for, you know, in back rooms, sort of secret deals. It seems to me that is the weakest point of our democracy, and it's one of their most dominant habits, which really undermines the public interest. So I think the essential thing is, if everybody acts authentically on what they consider to be the public interest in this case, then I think it will work.
Yeah, just finally, obviously you are only running in the law, the House is where government's formed. It's going to be a really interesting race there, and there's the polls that are suggesting we're going to see a Min's victory. I don't really trust the polls much. I'm interested. What are your thoughts? What do you make about who's going to form government? Because of course, if you are elected into that upper house balanced power role, you'll be working out differences and working through things with either maybe a Min's majority, Min's minority. It could be anything at this stage.
Look, I mean, obviously we will work with whatever situation we find ourselves in, and we will continue to apply our guiding principles to every decision that we're involved in taking. So I think that in a way, although it clearly matters to the state, in a way that won't change depending on who is the sort of dominant or who has the kind of numbers in the lower house. We will work with whoever is there, and we will have that conversation as it arises, but always according to our guiding principles and according to the beliefs and the best interests of our community.
It's going to be a fascinating election campaign. We'll be covering it in both houses very closely. Elizabeth Farrelly, thanks very much for your time. Best of luck.
Thanks, Leonardo. Talk soon.